U redu, za ljude koji da kažemo znaju srpski ili srpsko-hrvatski ili BHCS, kako se sada politički korektno kaže, preporuka, pošto će nam se profesor pridružiti za 15 minuta, najranije preporuka, ako nemaju druga posla, da bace pogled na intervju koji smo uradili sa profesorom. Oni koji su učestvovali u anketi koju smo pravili, znaju za taj intervju, oni su gledali snimak. A evo ko ima vremena 10 minuta, a bit će toliko vremena dok se ne počne sigurno, može da pročita ovaj prvi deo intervjua, jer mislim da je korisno čisto da znamo kako ćemo da se krećemo u diskusiji, jer dosta smo komunicirali sa profesorom Wolffom i dosta smo tema načeli, pa eto čisto da možete da možda prođete kroz tekst čisto da vidite čega smo se sve dotakli. Sa profesorom sam se čuo poslednji put pre 10-ak dana, možda malo više, i on je prezauzet, trebali smo se čujemo još jednom da dogovorimo tačnu agendu, nismo se dogovorili za tačnu agendu, ali nema veze, vidjet ćete, on je čovek sada u velikoj formi, da tako kažem, medijskoj i jako se dobro snalazi i mislim da će vrlo dobro da funkcioniše komunikacija, bit će na engleskom. Ako neko nije siguran u svoj engleski, neka nam pošalje pitanje u chat, mi ćemo ga ili prevesti, sad kako bude, zavisi od dinamike. Znači nismo bog zna šta dogovorili, ja ću se držati teme iz naslova, pitaću šta inače fenomen teorija zavere otkriva o društvu i specifično šta otkrivaju teorije zavere o američkom društvu, bilo ove najnovije, najaktuelnije, bilo one koje istorijski se razvijaju i postoje već decenijama, ako ne i duže. Eto, toliko od mene. Sad ću malo na engleskom. For those of you that are speaking English, don't worry, it will be in English. So we just summed up some sort of a history of communication with Professor Wolff. We contacted him according to goals of the project to deal with the phenomena of conspiracy theories, and especially with the mechanisms of occurrence, development of that phenomenon, widespreading, and all social, let's say, struggles and worries and activities that are related to it. And of course, especially we were interested in the most recent developments and most recent effects of that phenomenon on political ongoings, also cultural life in United States. So for those of you that are interested in details, there are several already realized to say materials available. Our first guest in the project was Jack Bratich, who was recognized by our consultants from United States as a prominent theoretician, and he really is, and we realized later when we entered the field of academic research about the phenomenon. So he gave a lecture that you can find on our YouTube page, and in fact warned us about the problematic that we could call black and white, problem of black and white approach to conspiracy theories, because once you enter the academic research, you simply realize that there are two problems. First, that we see as conspiracy theories, and most of the people here, I mean, have some sort of a rational approach to the phenomenon. Like when we say conspiracy theories, we think about stories, beliefs, propaganda as well, that is totally unbased in reality or factography, or that is totally more or less thing of fantasy, and also of conscious action to produce it. Only recently we found out that this is also, there is a big business about producing and spreading conspiracy theories. I mean, big business, something that could be called serious business on the internet, also in publishing. But he warned us about the let's say the aspect of weaponizing of the very term conspiracy theories that we also witness, that it's very easy to put a label of conspiracy theorist or conspiracy theory to anything that is, let's say, in a domain of dissent, of opposition, of reaction to standpoints, and also politics and policy of conventional ruling ideology. So we have to be cautious as well, though in this discussion and in this project, we think that we all know what we think when we say conspiracy theories. So we have to be aware that the term is easily used as a weapon against, I mean, any resistance, any doubt, any confrontation with the order, given political order, with the ruling ideology. But on the other hand, it is a phenomenon that is really in many aspects problematic, and like that simply somehow destroys or makes serious confusion, produces serious, very damaging confusion in public debate, in very capacity of argumentation in public debate. So like it's complex dialectics, and I think that this recent ongoing in our region, with especially this so-called anti-vax movements and demonstrations, and this desperate resistance that is really how to say, you know, unexpected, and at least as far as I know, most of the people that I know are totally shocked with the strength, with the composition, with agenda, with the somehow to say sincerity also of that movement, and totally international presence. I mean, if there is a power that is against the ruling order at the moment, maybe not in the right way, in fact, for sure not in the right direction and in the right place, but it is a power against the ruling order. On the other hand, maybe it is in fact totally opposite. It is some sort of false revolution. Not revolution, but like false opposition, like for example, historical fascism or proto-fascism was, with pseudo-revolutionary rhetorics, with a huge concentration of anger, of spite against everything and everybody. That, of course, in the end, if not in the beginning, became a very reliable tool of the very order that they seemingly try to confront with. Okay, so we are waiting for Professor Wolff. So if there are any questions or comments, or you have any kind of proposal, I think that there will be place for all questions, for all proposals, since, as I said, for the ones that are a little bit late, we didn't manage due to the intense schedule of Professor Wolff to go into details, So maybe all of you know already that we 2 times postponed the seminar for different reasons, and we will try to make it properly today. Okay, so once again, here is also the second part of the interview. I also can present you. I can present you my idea about the let's say the beginning of the discussion. In fact, there is a recent address by Professor Wolff about, here is the second part of the interview in Serbian only, unfortunately, so far. So for the ones that would find it useful to read it now. My idea was there was a recent address that I will also share here by Professor Wolff that was commenting on something that was called, let's say, it was about anti-vaxxers, and he commented, this is the title, I just have to find it. It says, real problems, wrong solutions. That is one. To je njegovo tipično obraćanje u odgovor na pitanja ove Patreon community, ne znam kako bi se to kod nas prevelo, da kažem, donatorske zajednice, ajde da kažem, to su ljudi koji za $3 mesečno spomažu Democracy at Work, znači njegovu ovu inicijativu, i onda, da kažem, imaju možda malo jednu prednost u postavljanju pitanja, i to je bilo jedno, a drugo je bilo samo trenutak, baš o antivakserima. Evo ga. Racionalno i iracionalno u antivakserstvu. Čovjek ovako ne bi mogao poverovati da jedan ozbiljan profesor, mislim na prvu loptu da kažem, da jedan ozbiljan profesor nalazi nešto racionalno u antivakserstvu, ali kao što ćete videti ako budete odgledali update, vrlo je zanimljivo jer on uvek kombinuje teme u ovim polusatnim obraćanjima, to je kao neki ekonomsko-političko-ideološki dnevnik. Dosta od vas to već zna i vidim da ljudi prate i tako, javili su se ljudi koji su redovni tamo. On je našao šta je tu realno i, da kažem, racionalno, a šta je iracionalno. I mislim tako da počnem razgovor, da ga pitam, on je o antivakserstvu pričao, a da ga pitam konkretno za teorije zavere. Šta od možda najpoznatijih, koje ću isto pomenuti, to su prema predavanju Jacka Bratića ubistvo Kennedyja, znači da nije Lee Oswald bio sam, a 9.11. da je američka vlada na neki način ili znala ili bila umešana, i sada QAnon da kažem, najaktuelnija i najtoksičnija, bar sudeći po medijima. Šta tu postoji kao nešto što bi sad, ne znam, neki istraživač za 100 godina, kada nismo više pod tim uticajima i afektom često nepodnošljivim tih teorija, šta bi našao kao društvene razloge postojanja tih teorija i njihovog širenja. Sad malo na engleski, ja pređem ponovo. So I posted here 2 recent addresses by Professor Wolff. The ones that are in text that I posted before are available in the form of recording of the interview that we did with Professor Wolff 2 months ago, and that was used by participants of the project to prepare for this seminar. So this, what I post, is some sort of shortened version of that interview. And 2 last posts are in fact recent addresses by Professor Wolff related to dialectics, to say, of phenomenon of anti-vaxxer movement. Of course, conspiracy theory is inevitable aspect and inevitable part of their narratives and their, to say, their again agendas. So I think that we are waiting. It might be that professor also gets late, but they would send a message if there is any problem. So no, there's no message. So he will be there at least at 8 o'clock. So if there is any question or comment or something that somebody would like to put forward to me as a moderator or like to professor directly, I think that if you have question for me or something that you would like to suggest or share, you can send it to me also or here for everyone, whatever you find proper and convenient. Okay, so to see now, most of the people that I see, but not more than half, participated in our inquiry. So if you are not busy with reading, which you are probably not, with reading and listening to these materials that I sent, I can say that, I mean, we did inquiry with mostly with leftist activists and people from cultural and NGO sector in the region, mostly from Serbia, but also from all ex-Yugoslav countries, also including Romania, Bulgaria. And I can say that, I mean, there were more than 50, almost 60 participants. I can say that, I mean, there is a very, very, how to say, very mature, very accurate, very theoretically, to say, solid understanding of the phenomenon. So in spite of the fact that we all, when we say conspiracy theory, we somehow know what we think. So Jack Bratic, through criticizing something that he calls conspiracy panic, he referred to the problem that is real, that it's very hard to define what is conspiracy theory. It's very, very hard. There is one description that he finds like mostly adopted in academic field by I mean John Uszczynski, I don't know how his name is pronounced, like people that believe in things and stories that are not that cannot be checked and usually are not at all based in any sort of solid photography, and that what they believe in is that secret groups are ruling world affairs and affairs of specific communities, states, nations, economies, cultures, etc., etc. So, but if you read, and we read so far, soon we will publish, we asked young students, activists, artists to translate, to read some of that academic works and to retell them as they, I mean, supposedly as they retell literature, obligatory literature in the school. So if there is a scientific work of 10 to 15, 20 pages, they would retell it in 1, 2, 3 pages. So you can read what is, it's not abstract, it's something much more complex and much more informative. And all that works are in a very big trouble in definitions, in locating. I mean, if you would say that there is this type of, like type, not like this fraction, this part of population that is more prone to conspiracy theories, most of the research would deny that expectation. There is no, as Jodi Dean put it in her research and conclusion, we are all in some conspiracy. It just depends in which we are, you know. So it's like very complex problematic, and I can say that what we see and hear, and this is where Jack Bratich was very, to say, humorous as well, like conspiracy theory is like pornography. You know it when you see it, you know, like only we are invited to recognize and to design, to label something a conspiracy theory when we see the story and when we hear their facts, etc., etc. So this is it. I think that we will soon start. Still we don't have professor. Okay, please feel free to ask or to, I don't know, to comment something so that we maybe spare some time later. I can maybe just repeat some of motives to start with this project. We did in Cultural Center X for years. We did projects with history and theory of fascism, because we worked in a space that was in many ways related to Holocaust in occupied Serbia. So this was, in fact, once the center of Jewish community in Belgrade. Now it's again Jewish Cultural Center, and we somehow noticed that there is a resemblance of some sort of very superficial treatment of the phenomenon of fascism, especially contemporary fascism. Some sort of very, to say, weaponizing that term in a way to justify the ruling order, you know, also the ruling ideology. Somehow it is, I mean, I think that in the end, Trump was a champion of that, you know, like with like fighting against anti-Semitism, etc., etc. So I think that there is a resemblance, and that using the term conspiracy theory like by default and without any to say cautiousness about about its complexity, about its widespread and very complex presence in public and also in society, is also being turned into a weapon of defending the system that maybe shouldn't be defended all the time. Hello, Professor. Hello.
How are you?
We are okay. We are okay here. It's evening. For most of us, I think that everybody here, everybody else is from so-called Southeastern Europe region, Southeastern European region. I think that only somebody from Romania, you know, is out of the another, to say, restrictive term, Western Balkans. So Western Balkans, Southeastern Romania. How are you?
Fine.
So these are mostly participants in our project that saw your interview that we made, and that are pretty much aware of your practice, of your work at Democracy at Work, your about economic update, but also there are newcomers that even I am not sure about few of them, what they are doing, in spite of the fact that there was obligation to apply for a seminar with some sort of short motivation statement. Anyway, if you don't have some sort of prepared address,
I thought it might be interesting just to start with some reflections on the situation in the United States, in the hope that people might be interested.
Please.
Okay. The social and economic conditions of the United States are in extremely difficult, painful circumstances. I have never in my entire life, and I was born in the United States, I've never seen the country in this situation, in these conditions. I don't see a way out. Most of my fellow citizens, left wing, right wing, and in the middle, don't. It's clear that the leadership of both political major parties have no idea what to do. So it is absolutely extraordinary what is going on in our society. So let me present you very few but key statistics to give you an idea. The United States population is about 4.5% of the world. But we currently have 15.5% of the world's deaths from COVID. We have one of the most developed medical systems in the world. We are one of the richest countries in the world, and we failed to prepare for this pandemic, and we failed to cope with this pandemic, and we failed in relationship to many other countries all around the world who are much less wealthy and with much less developed medical care systems, who were able to prepare for and handle COVID much more successfully than the United States. Number two, the United States has fought 3 serious wars in the last 35 years. Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. And the United States has been defeated in each of those 3 countries. It has spent at least $4 to $6 trillion on those three wars. $4 to $6 trillion, and it lost every one of them. Number three, for the first time in a century, the United States has a real, serious economic competitor. The closest thing the United States had to real competition was before and leading up to World War I, when it could be argued that the United Kingdom and Germany were perhaps some sort of competitor. After World War I, they were no longer competitors, and they never became competitors again. Neither did the Japanese, nor did the Soviet Union, which may have been serious military competitors, but they were never serious economic competitors. The United States, therefore, was and is now unprepared ideologically, economically, politically, to struggle with a serious economic competitor for the first time in a century. And of course, I mean the People's Republic of China. In many respects, the economic development of China has already surpassed that of the United States. And that becomes truer with every passing month. Fourth, the level of political disagreement in the United States is profound, and the disagreements operate on several levels. There is, and this I'm sure you know from Europe, there is a significant part of the population which over the last 30 years lost their jobs, lost their labor unions, lost their homes, and lost any prospects for their children to regain the standard of living that they had. This was because industry left the United States. Over the last 40 years, American capitalism, in order to pursue profitability, as capitalists always do, made the decision to do three things that have fundamentally destabilized the American system. Number one, they moved production out of the United States. Wherever they could, relocate it where wages were much lower. China, India, Mexico, Brazil, I could go on, but you understand what I'm telling you. Number two, where they could not relocate the jobs, they automated the jobs. That is, they replaced people with machines. And here the most important machines were the computer in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, then the robot, and now artificial intelligence. Those jobs that were not relocated outside were destroyed by automation. Those jobs that could not be relocated outside or destroyed by automation, the response of American capitalists was to bring into the United States huge numbers of new immigrants, mostly from Central and Southern America. but not only, but mostly Hispanic immigrants. The result of these three profit-driven capitalist decisions was to finish the ongoing destruction of the American trade union movement, which had been underway ever since the end of World War II. The jobs that were automated, the jobs that were relocated, were the ones that paid the highest wages. They were the ones in industries that were very well automated. In other words, the people who lost their jobs were the upper layers of the working class, the better paid, the ones that Lenin might have referred to as the aristocracy of the labor class in the United States. They are the ones who lost their unions. They are the ones who lost their jobs. They are the ones who lost their homes. They are an angry, bitter group of people. I would estimate roughly between 30 and 40% of the population. They are not our poor. They are a rank above the poor. They are not rich.
Uită pe Robert Reich.
Dar nu mă
Can you-
interesează.
Florin,
Can you hear me?
yeah, we just had an interruption by, sorry, please go on.
Okay. This class of angry, bitter people feels that they have been betrayed by the promise of the American dream. They've been betrayed because they are not going to have a good job. They are not going to get one. They are never going to re-establish the standard of living they once had. And their children are not going to be able to do it either. And they are easily captured politically and ideologically by anyone who acknowledges explicitly their belief, their sense of betrayal. And the only politicians who did that in the last decade were Donald Trump on the right and Bernie Sanders on the left. And that is why Donald Trump became president and Bernie Sanders became the most popular politician in the Democratic Party, even though he is still only a senator. The situation now is complicated because in the anger of the working upper levels of the working class, not only was Donald Trump able to appeal to them by acting out the sense of betrayal, the sense of loss, the sense that somebody has done this to us, but he promised to correct the situation. For example, to stop the movement of jobs out of the United States. He made a big promise to do that. He made a big promise to bring back industries that had paid good union wages. For example, the coal mining industries, the automobile industries. And he promised to punish the evil people who he said were responsible for this terrible economic decline. And he chose as his evil other the People's Republic of China and in particular, the Chinese Communist Party that is in power there. And he promised to correct the situation by punishing the Chinese as the ones who did the bad thing. That's why he declared a trade war against China. That's why he imposed tariffs against China. That's why he arrested the daughter of the CEO of the Huawei Corporation, or he had the Canadians do that for him. I'm sure most of you don't need me to explain to you that Canada is the 51st state in the United States.
They wouldn't be happy to hear that, I think.
No, they are never happy to hear it, but they quietly, especially after 2 beers, they say it to themselves because they know. And never more so than under Mr. Trudeau, who has that lovely mixture of theater that he's not what in fact he is. But I put that as
All countries in the world are 51st state. There's a
Yes.
big competition. Which one is 51st, 52nd or so?
right. In this situation of bitterness and real suffering, anyone who can come forward, because I know what you've been studying, anyone who can come forward with a plausible theory of why all this has happened is given an audience quickly. So, for example, our anti-Black racists, of which we have always had a large number, this has been a wonderful opportunity because they can portray the situation this way. The evil liberals who run the Democratic Party, for example, right now, President Biden, the evil liberals, to gain votes, have a conspiracy to help Black people at the expense of white people. And they've been doing that, and that's why white workers are suffering. And it began when they put a Black man into office, Obama, as president. And it continues now. The evil Democratic leaders, again, Clinton, Biden, those people, are responsible for sacrificing the white working class to help the Blacks purely to gain the votes of the Blacks to stay in power. Likewise, they are bringing in the immigrants again to stay in power. And we must, say these people, we must fight against the Democrats to stop being sacrificed for the Blacks and to stop the immigration that is only designed to keep those Democrats in power. That's why, for example, every time the Black population or the Hispanic population achieve anything, for example, tearing down a statue in a southern city of a politician who was actively pro-slavery, last century, is an issue of great importance because it is used as a sign of what is intended for the white community in general. Their degradation economically is now to be worsened by denying their history, destroying their historical heroes, and all the rest. The next step. Here in the United States, we now have a serious economic problem with inflation. Prices have gone up over the last year, depending on how you count, roughly 6 to 7%, and average wages have gone up 3 to 4%. In other words, after the worst of the pandemic is over, the working class is going back to work to discover that their jobs are worse now than they were before, and that their living standard, based on their wages, even where they've gone up, is worse than it was before. Why? Because the capitalist class in this country suffered, with some exceptions, but most employers suffered over the last year and a half because we had a crashed economy and we had COVID. Now that this is receding, these companies need to make profits again, but they want to make extra profits to make up for the last 18 months during which they didn't make even their normal profits. So what they've done is brought back 3 people to do the work that used to be done by 4. They've brought back people into job conditions that are deteriorated. It's not so well heated. It's not so well cooled. The bathroom doesn't work really all that well, but they're not going to spend money because they are recouping their profits. Long story short, the working class over the last 5 months came back to worse conditions than they left. And they are therefore bitter and angry and furious, which leads to the 2 statistics I want to end with. The United States government keeps a number called the rate of quitting jobs. This is when workers leave a job, not because the employer says you don't come back, you're fired, not because the business goes out of business, none of that. It's when the worker on his own or on her own says, I don't want this job anymore, I'm done. We have a record of that. We have the highest rate of quitting in American history, at least for the last 25 years. And number 2, we are having more strikes by workers, unionized workers, than we have seen also in 25 years. As I'm talking to you, for example, the Nabisco people who make cookies, huge corporation, big strike this summer. Kellogg, who make the cereal everybody has for breakfast in America, is on strike right now, 12,000 workers. John Deere, the producer of farm equipment, tractors, and all of that, on strike right now, 10,000 workers. And I could go on. This is an angry, bitter working class. My hope, and that's all it is at this point, my hope, they have gone to the right politically for the last 7 or 8 years, leading up to and including the presidency of Mr. Trump. But they are becoming more and more aware that Trump did absolutely nothing for them. Their wages haven't gone up. Their job conditions haven't gone up. The outflow of jobs has not stopped. The only thing you could say maybe he achieved was expelling immigrants. Mr. Biden is continuing to expel immigrants. In fact, the rate of expelling immigrants under Mr. Biden in his first year is greater than any year that Mr. Trump was in office. But the problem with that is that the immigrant was never the cause of anything in the American economy. Just to make clear that we all understand this, the population of the United States is 330 million people. The estimate of undocumented immigrants in the United States is 10, maybe 12 million people. 10 to 12 million people cannot determine the economic well-being of any society. That's too small a number, and anyone who's ever studied economics would know that. So it is no great thing to point out that expelling immigrants doesn't change the disaster of the American economy. It is a symbolic political theater, terribly cruel to the people that are expelled and their families and the countries to which they return. But other than that, it has no substantive effect. In fact, there is now across the United States, and pardon my laughing, but you know, as a great singer in America once said, we laugh to keep from crying. We now have a labor shortage in the United States because, of course, with angry people quitting and with immigrants being expelled, there are not enough people to do the work mostly at the lowest levels of income in our society. And we hear a great deal of complaint, and the right wing suggests that workers have become lazy. Why do I tell you this? Because I am now aware for the first time that the American working class is beginning to realize that the right-wing solution to what has been done to them for the last 30 to 40 years, represented by Trump, represented by white supremacy, is a dead end. It doesn't solve their problem. So they've decided to quit their jobs. They've decided to become militant in their labor unions, and they've decided to become interested in socialism, not because they're attracted so much to socialism, but because for them, capitalism is unacceptable anymore. And I've never seen that before in the United States, and I see it now everywhere in the United States. And I think you all have to think about this because it's going to affect you in all manner of ways I can't even foresee. But it is a changed country. It cannot behave in the future the way it has in the past. And that's obvious to all of us now. All right, let me stop there.
Thank you for economic update global edition. I think that the ones that managed to follow some of your recent addresses recognize the many of the topics. Now, to try to make some sort of a focus for our topic, I would just refer to something that Noam Chomsky recently mentioned as a let's say, he named the period of last, let's say, 30 years, maybe 25, 30 years, as he named it as great replacement. And he thought about replacement of, let's, in short, successful capitalism with unsuccessful capitalism, with capitalism that could provide at least decent existence to most of the working class, to capitalism that simply just produces confusion about its own incapacity. And then we have conspiracy theorists using the same word, great replacement. You were just mentioning, like immigrants are being brought to replace us, etc., etc. So can we find there some sort of a let's say, a solid ground for analysis of what you termed in the title of one of your recent addresses, let's say, rational in, it was about anti-vaxxers, but anyway, rational in protesting great replacement and irrational in protesting great replacement. It's interesting that the same term is used for totally different things, but they somehow refer to some sort of economic context that is radically changed, but seen from totally different political perspectives.
Yeah, you have to remember that in the United States, and there's no polite way for me to say this, in the United States, economic literacy is very, very low. Our people are not taught in elementary school, in high school, in the university. They're just not taught how an economy works. I've been a professor of economics my entire life, teaching mostly here in the United States. And I have to explain to you that if people are aware, as they are, that their economic situation is deteriorating, and they are aware of that, and if they are upset by that, and they are upset by that, they don't have the analysis. No one has ever taught them. And I'm not talking about a critical analysis. They don't have that either. But they don't even have what you might call a bourgeois analysis. They don't even have the analysis that the system presents to explain all of this. They just don't know. And so they are very vulnerable to any kind of conspiracy theory. So, for example, and I know this from going around and speaking to trade unions and in churches all over. I don't do it so much now because of COVID, but up until COVID, I was doing a lot of speaking and so on. They think that their situation has deteriorated, but somehow other people's hasn't. So often I'm in a position of having to explain. I mean, to take an hour out of a 2-hour evening to explain to them that no, it's not just you people in this industry or in this region that have declined. It's across the board. It's a national problem. In some cases, it's even an international problem. They have a very hard time with that. In their minds, we are being diminished to be replaced by somebody else. They're looking for the replacement, and they want to see who it is so they can figure out who's arranging for the replacement, and that then becomes the enemy. And in our society, the Republican Party steps in and says, women, Black people, brown people, they are replacing you, and it's the Democratic Party, maybe helped by big banks in New York, that are arranging it all. And this is a widely believed kind of general conspiracy theory. There are variations of it, but it's generally the idea the evil Democratic Party, and we are not, I really have to stress this for you. We saw, starting on January 6th in Washington, and since, there is a serious problem in the United States now of people on the extreme right wing who are trying to kill Democratic politicians. These are Democratic Party politicians that are 100% pro-capitalist, have always been pro-capitalist, are not critical in any way systematically. They are just apparatchiks of the Democratic Party. They are being hassled, threatened, shot, stabbed, an extraordinary level of hatred of one party for another. This is a sign of this general conspiracy theory. the evil Democratic Party to stay in power and help their rich friends on Wall Street, you get a little of that, are bringing in their people to replace us. So our jobs, we don't have our jobs anymore. They're being given to Black people, brown people, immigrant people, women, and maybe a few others. If I had time, I would talk to you that this is also a very severe gender problem. The divisions in this country between men and women is almost as severe as between white and Black. The white working class feels itself to be fundamentally threatened. And they have a major political party with a lot of very wealthy donors who are feeding this idea, celebrating it on the internet, on television, in the radio, in the ranks of the Republican Party. Because inside the Republican Party, this issue is also being fought out. There are all kinds of what we call here moderate Republicans who don't want to do this. But they are mostly weak, and they are mostly losing to the much more extreme Trump, Bannon, those kinds of people that are still able to exploit in a classic demagoguery the real unhappiness, the real suffering. Let me stress to you, the white working class has been very badly hurt in the United States, and that continues. That's why I ended a few minutes ago saying this is now lasting too long, so that Mr. Trump didn't fix any of this. And ironically, perhaps the best thing that happened to the Republicans was the victory of Mr. Biden, because maybe now they can blame him that nothing is changing. And my guess is they will do that. But then the double contradiction, the irony, if the Republicans blame Biden that nothing changes, they will, in a peculiar way, create the opportunity for Bernie Sanders and the rising socialist movement in this country to get much more votes. I'll give you one example. My last 4 radio and television interviews here in the United States over the last 2.5 days have all been on one subject. And that is the fact that in about 2 weeks, we all expect that the second biggest city in the state of New York, the city of Buffalo, New York, a very large city, very important city, will elect a Black woman socialist as mayor. And that will be the first large American city to have a socialist mayor in many decades. And suddenly the media kind of figured this out. And so the interesting thing is that the analyses are coming in the mass media, but people like me are being asked what I think about this. And when I say I am very happy that this is happening, that's included in the news story. That has not happened in my lifetime before. Because I'm talking about the mainstream, the biggest media we have. So everybody recognizes that something fundamental is changing in the United States. No one knows exactly where it's going to end up. I don't know either. But that there is something very basically changing, that everybody agrees to, whether they like it or hate it, that varies.
I would have one more question, and later everybody can ask or raise a hand or write in a chat. So to keep to trace our topic, you mentioned that system simply failure, that it was huge failure. This relation of 4% of world population and 15 before it was even 20% of COVID casualties. So we know that conspiracists, whoever they are, you know, sometimes that it's not even nice to label them as such, but people that challenge the official narratives, they call it plandemic, that there was a plan. So where you say failure, they put plan. So following your recent addresses, so you just mentioned several topics that all political elite. So the question is political elite itself literate, or they're just cheating public with these topics? Who is paying Chinese tariffs? Who will recover manufacture in United States? Who is guilty for long supply chains? Who is guilty for labor shortage, etc., etc. So you explained how these topics are totally wrongly articulated, wrongly presented in public by all political elite, not only by, I don't know, right wing, or I don't know if socialist addresses as you are addressing those issues, but which level of rationality we have to address to this notion of plan, not conscious plan, but inevitability of failure in a given system. So in order to somehow make difference between irrational stories about a plan of a small group to launch a virus, and the fact that system consciously lacks proper planning in terms of healthcare and international trade and anything that you are talking about in your addresses.
Well, I agree with you that the same basic kind of conspiracy theory is offered across the board by many different political tendencies who may even disagree a little bit about who the conspirators are, but that there's a conspiracy there. That's a very popular way of thinking. You certainly have it on the left in the United States, which is quick to find some institution as the conspirators or some cross-institutional group that's the conspirators. I'll give you some examples if it may help you. There's a fairly large strain of thought, mostly on the left, but you have some of it on the right, that pinpoints money and our central bank, in this case, the Federal Reserve, which is the central bank of the United States. There's a strain of thought that has them as the evil masterminds that are organizing, that they're, for example, responsible for the ups and downs of the capitalist economy, the cycles, that these are not intrinsic to capitalism. They are planned events that those who run the central bank cause to happen. Then there's a variation, which goes here by the name Libertarianism. This is a remarkable thing. They are conspiracy theorists. Their conspiracy, however, isn't the Federal Reserve, although they hate the Federal Reserve, it's the government. In other words, every flaw, every failure of the system we live in is understood to be the result of governmental policy. And they're not really interested in whether it's the Federal Reserve or the president or the leading political parties or some combination. It's the government. And as you listen to libertarians, because they're fairly strong here in the United States, you begin to see what the basic issue is. They are doing the work of persuading the American people that every economic problem you can raise is, number one, the fault of the government, and number two, specifically, that the government has intervened in private capitalism, which, if it were just free of government intervention, would never have had the problem or would have solved the problem. In other words, they are teaching the American people that when your employer fires you, or when the local bank throws you out of your home because you can't make the mortgage payments, don't get angry at the employer who fired you. Don't get angry at the banker who threw you out of your home, because they're not the problem. It's the government. And then they'll point to some law that was passed or some regulation that was passed by the government that forced the banks to do what they did, or that forced the employer to do what he did. In other words, it's a systematic training of people to identify their problem as anything other than capitalism, the system itself. Americans are subjected to this. For many Americans, that's the closest idea to a theory of economics that they ever heard. It's not that they choose it over others. They never heard anything else. I would give you, I'm not exaggerating, somewhere between 1/3 and half the newspapers in America talk like this. That is, they will present day after day an analysis, say a local shortage of milk, or a strike, or declining wages, or a rising poverty level. And they will present it in such a way that the viewer on television will be helped to identify what government action led to whatever it is that they're explaining to us in that evening's television show. So you have these kinds of conspiracy theories that are probably more generally believed than the more narrowly constructed ones, like the Federal Reserve is the evil, or even these are more widely believed than that China is evil. I mean, to be honest with you, Americans are not knowledgeable about, and they're not very interested in what goes on in the rest of the world. Most Americans don't think it matters. They're barely interested in whatever other part of the world their grandmother or grandfather came from. So once in a while they go back to Ireland, or to the Czech Republic, or to Poland, or to Italy, and they look at the village they remember grandmother spoke about. But it's a tourist trip. It's not a reality for them. And so they think that everything that happens is easily explainable. And if someone tells them the evil Chinese, it's fine. It means about as much as the evil Russians. And nobody kind of made much sense of that either. So if you ask them, what do you know about Russia? They would tell you Stalin killed a lot of people. Okay, anything else you know? No, that's about it. In other words, it's a country that is famous for whatever bad thing you could say. And then nowadays, by the way, the right wing is teaching Americans Stalin, who killed a lot of people, is gone. But then there was Mao, and he killed even more people. You see? So that's why China, and for many Americans, I know this may surprise you, but don't be surprised. I am not making this up. For an enormous number of Americans, otherwise perfectly nice people, intelligent people, educated people, they will tell you about Russia and China. They haven't the faintest idea. They have no concept of what these societies are. None. It is a caricature which, if you showed them an equivalent caricature in any other area of life, they would quickly identify it as a caricature, not to be taken seriously. But in these subjects have been taboo for so long that you literally have lost the capacity to think in a reasonable way. I give you an example. To my classes, I show film footage of Chinese cities today. Shanghai, Tianjin, Beijing, Wuhan. And they look at me, these are students in the ages 23 to 30 years of age. They are master's degree students, well-educated, thoughtful, good people, really nice human beings. They cannot believe the tall buildings. They have tall buildings. Yes, I said, here's the fast train that goes from this city to that city. I say, that's a faster train than exists in the United States. Are you, that's a city in China? Yeah, that's not really a city. Yes, it's a city in China. I didn't make this up. Go to Google and put China, really, I am not exaggerating. So for me, these are secondary conspiracies. They're willing to believe almost anything about Russia and China, but it doesn't touch them. It's far away, and our good president is teaching them a lesson by hitting them with a tariff or telling them they shouldn't be nasty to the Uyghurs. Americans have no idea what Uyghur is. They have no idea what the proportion of Muslims is. This is a country that has just been killing Muslims in Afghanistan and Iraq for the last 20 years, but is extremely critical of China for abusing Muslims. Now, for most Americans, once you explain this, they look at you and they don't understand it, which is a step forward. But there's no frame of reference here. That's why these struggles that I'm telling you about are so important for you to understand, because they're being fought out and they will shape the future of this country. But they're not fought out in the kinds of images and words and metaphors that Europeans are used to. And so it's very hard to make the communication happen. So yes, conspiracy theories are widespread. By the way, they exist on the left as well. For example, the demonization of the Federal Reserve, that's a very big idea on the left in the United States. I have colleagues who are professors of economics who think of themselves as socialists, who are spending their lives explaining how the Federal Reserve is the bad thing and that we shouldn't have a Federal Reserve because it isn't democratic, and we should elect the Federal Reserve rather than have it appointed by the president and the banks. And when you try to explain to them, this is not adequate, this is not a solution adequate to the scope of the problem, they don't know what to do with what you say. They're at a loss. They need to think in terms of an identifiable bad thing that is operated by an identifiable bad group of people.
Unfortunately, also these scientific papers tell us that conspiracy theories are spread throughout political spectrum. That was a great surprise for me. But anyway, I think that you somehow were describing something that I would call successful upgrade of European centrism by American isolationism. So like it's a bad situation. Anyway, thank you so much. I'm encouraging everybody to send question or to raise a hand and comment or ask Professor Wolff whatever they find interesting for them. I had a great pleasure to communicate with. Here is okay. Unmute just to. How to unmute? Can you unmute yourself, Shachirovich?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah, please.
Okay, so
can you just introduce yourself, like in maybe one sentence, so that?
Okay, I'm Filip Šačirović. I'm a high school teacher from Serbia and also a Marxist activist. It's interesting when we were talking about when the professor was talking about conspiracy theories, that usually the focus was on the Republican conspiracy theories. But I think one of the biggest problems with the American politics and with the American public opinion is that really conspiracy theories come from both sides of the congressional aisle. And the Democratic conspiracy theories are just as prevalent. For example, if we look at the Russiagate thing, that too was a very, very ridiculous conspiracy theory, and everyone bought into it. And when I say everyone, I mean people who consider themselves socialists and are somehow, for some reason, still members of the Democratic Party, who've all been, or at least most of them, have been trumpeting this kind of idea. Not that Trump is a bad president because he's destroying the lives of the American people. Not that he's a bad president because he's propping up capitalism, but he's a traitor, whatever that means. Mm-hmm. And it's very easy and we see a similar phenomenon in Serbia as well, and I think it's very present in Eastern Europe. It's very easy for people to buy into conspiracy theories and to become paranoid towards the outside world when mainstream political parties basically compete in various forms of nationalism. They compete who will be a bigger nationalist. And on the other hand, I think there's another problem, that there isn't really any political leadership of the working class in America right now. People who call themselves socialists, like Bernie Sanders, like AOC, like this woman India something that was elected mayor of Buffalo, they're not socialist by any stretch of imagination. Calling them socialist basically completely devalues that word. They're simply liberals who have rebranded themselves and who in no way question capitalism, who in no way question or pose the question of another economic system, of another social system. And they too compete with the Republicans for their own brand of nationalism. Because when they say all of us Americans should come together, just because that's not racist doesn't mean that that is not a nationalistic and a chauvinistic position, and a position that is openly hostile to the rest of the world and openly lenient towards American imperialism, for example. Not to mention the fact that once in power, or even close to power, as we see with the squad of Bernie Sanders, these people do whatever they can to prop up the existing system and to make up a dozen excuses or more every day as to why a president should be supported just because he's a Democrat, and as to why the concerns of the regular working class people should take second place to some imaginary higher goals. So I would ask the professor, what does he think about the necessity for the working class movement not to support but to distance itself from these liberals in socialist clothing, and to try and bring about a genuine working class leadership? Yeah, sorry if I took too long.
Not at all. I think your question was very good, very excellent, and I agree with almost everything you have just said. I think your analysis of what's going on in this country is pretty much what I would say myself. Here's a couple of areas where I would perhaps a little bit disagree, but not with the basic formulation that you give. I would say that the problem is not so much that there isn't a genuine independent working class movement or leadership. I mean, I know what you're saying, and technically you are correct, but I wouldn't put it that way. Here's what I would put it. There isn't a developed consciousness that there could be a problem with the system itself. In other words, that it isn't this or that political party, or this or that politician, or this or that law, or this or that it is a much deeper problem with the system as a whole, so that a political leader or a political movement has to take a position, because we are conscious of this, a position about the system, the capitalist system, for example, and the socialist system. We don't have that kind of conversation in this country unless the few of us who think like that force it. And if I had to tell you what one of my projects is in the work I do, it is precisely to talk about systemic differences, to criticize analyses that don't bring up systemic differences, because that's a failure to understand the level at which the problems we face function. The other area where I would qualify a little bit what you said, from the late 1940s until about 2015. So we're talking 70 years at least. It was completely taboo in this country to talk about communism, socialism, anarchism, you name it. Here's how bad it is. When I began teaching here in the United States, I early discovered that my students could not understand what the difference was between, for example, communism, socialism, and anarchism. For my students, my intelligent, smart, politically interested students, these were synonyms. They were just different ways of saying the same thing. And I was astonished, because even I was born in the United States, but my parents are Europeans, and I grew up in a household which understood very well what the differences are between communism, socialism, and anarchism, for example. And then it occurred to me, as I asked my students where they got these ideas from, that I was talking to America. That in the United States, after World War II, the business community and the government that it essentially controlled decided they had to undo the New Deal that had happened in the 1930s under Roosevelt, and the alliance with the Soviet Union, which had happened as part of World War II. And that in order to undo these things, they had to accomplish a systematic purge of socialists, communists, and anybody like that out of the government, out of the media, out of the universities, and that's what was done. And most Americans to this day, at least until 2015, dealt with capitalism as if it were the only economic system that the world could imagine, that it was everywhere, basically, the system, and that a few people that were either uneducated or crazy were critical of it, but you didn't have to pay attention because they weren't important. Russia was important because it had bombs, but it wasn't important as a system or as an alternative. None of that made any difference. I am not exaggerating. I know that for some Europeans, as I explained this over the years, they find it hard to believe, but it is over and over again what the reality in this country is. And I say this to you because if you're working in that kind of a situation and the capitalist system begins to disintegrate, and that's what's happening here, people do not ask about another system. They have no training to do that. There is no voice that does that, gets any kind of attention, gets any kind of exposure. So it was enormously important in 2011, and that's crucial that year, when the Occupy movement explodes in New York City, which is where I live and where I work. Because that movement was the first one in 70 years to put at the front of its demands the problem of a society that has 1% of the people with the wealth and the power and 99% of the people with no wealth and no power. No movement, not the civil rights movement, not the ecological movement, not the feminist movement, none of them had dared to say that. They kept all economic questions, all things that might sound as criticisms of capitalism away, for fear that they would split and destroy their movements for gender equality, for racial equality, for environmental sensitivity, that those would be split from within and destroyed by the government from without if they dared say a word about capitalism. Occupy broke the taboo in 2011. Without that, no possibility for Bernie Sanders to have run in 2016. No possibility for Bernie to then be added to by AOC, by the about to be mayor of Buffalo, by Cory Bush in the Midwest, and by literally hundreds of people now calling themselves socialists running for office. Why am I positive about that? Because it's the beginning. It's the beginning of a process where in this country, socialism is an acceptable topic. Socialism can be argued. And it's already happening that people who are dissatisfied with the articulation of socialism that comes from Bernie or AOC are beginning to read and learn about other kinds of socialism. They are becoming aware that there have always been debates among socialists about what socialism is, what communism is, if it's different, how is it different, what are the debates among this is a learning process. And this learning process is frustrating and it is slow. But that's only testimony to the absolutely extraordinary ideological silencing that was this country's history from 1945 to 2015. And that's why people like me, who are way to the left, for example, of Bernie or AOC, are nonetheless grateful that those people have stepped forward and opened the space for the evolution of a genuine American socialism to be underway, and it is underway, and it is growing very fast. You're right, the dominant theme is still what you call left liberalism, or a kind of generic liberalism that rebrands itself as socialist. But you should see in your own language that it's an interesting question, that liberals who for 70 years went out of their way to avoid any hint of socialism are now in good numbers rushing into that development, calling themselves that, speaking publicly in that way. And that makes it possible for, you said you were a high school teacher, for thousands of high school teachers to talk about socialism in a way that isn't Stalin killing people or Mao killing people or any of the caricatures that used to be the only time these topics came up. Now they can come up about what the program is, and is that a solution? And are there other kinds of socialism? I think you're going to see all of that emerging in the months and years ahead, because the break with the taboo is the important change I think is underway.
Thank you, Professor. I would just have a short comment. I think that Philip's question is very accurate because the entire debate, at least in Eastern European left, in good part of Western European, whatever we call left, parliamentarian, let's say left, is about whether to submit to the challenge of bourgeois parliamentarism and to sacrifice the really socialist narrative that is known for, especially for people in Eastern countries, in some way. So it's a very accurate question, and I think that your answer is also great in terms of understanding American condition, which is not easy for us, I have to say. But anyway, let's go further. George Ivanovic, please, George, floor is yours.
Can you see me?
Izvoli, čujemo te.
Okay. Hello, Professor. Hello, everybody. My name is George. I'm from Novi Sad, from Serbia. I'm a journalist, and I've been following up on your work and some other intellectuals from the United States. My question was in regards to conspiracy theories, more specifically. I was really interested in reactions of my friends to the COVID pandemic and the economic crisis before that. So, yeah, a lot of their analysis leaned on what you just mentioned. There's this evil central bank in America, Federal Reserve, they're just printing money, they're doing whatever they want. But now with COVID, I realized something, that there's kind of a hole between their distrust in authority and their lack of knowledge. So whether we're talking about economical issues or the pandemic, they don't really have any knowledge on medicine or economy, but on the other hand, they are reluctant to believe any other authorities. They're reluctant to hear whatever economists, not one school or the other, but whatever economists or whatever doctors. So they're kind of trapped in a hole between not trusting anyone and not learning anything by themselves. So their only solution, it seems like, is conspiracy theories. So that's what I wanted to ask. That's what I was asking myself. What's the natural line between healthy criticism of something or a critical view of our issues today, both economic and medical, vaccines and so on, and where's the border where we still need to trust some authority, and where's the border of questioning? I hope I was clear.
Yeah, I think it's perfectly clear, and it's a kind of question that comes up here in the United States as well. Let me respond by pushing back a bit against what you've said in the following way. Now let me do it a different way. I work with a number of trade unions because there are a number of labor unions in the United States that are, how do I say this politely, very close to me in how I think, which may come as a surprise to you because that has to be kept quiet most of the time, that they should be thinking the way I do. One of my jobs in the United States is to have my mouth open all the time, to be talking and making one video after another. And if you look at my website, you'll see that we produce an enormous amount of material. That's my job. You know, I'm an older person. I don't have that many years left. And I see my job as opening the space for those coming after me, okay? And so here's what I would say in that framework. I have had to struggle with unions because many American unions, including many of the biggest ones, and I'm talking about organizations that have 500,000 members or more, they have been trapped in the following situation of the pandemic. The employer or the government has issued dictates. You must wear a mask. You must get vaccinated. You must have 2 shots from the vaccine, not 1, Right now, you must have a booster. You must have a test for antibodies, and so on. These people are now, for the reasons I mentioned earlier, so angry, so bitter about what has happened to them by Republicans and Democrats alike, that they are now no longer willing to be told what to do. They will not tolerate it. And it has nothing to do with a particular issue. The same people who I will not get vaccinated. They've already been vaccinated 20 times. They were vaccinated when they were born, because that's normal in this country. You get various vaccines at various ages. Every child is taken by their mother or their father to the doctor at a certain point and gets vaccinated. It's a non-issue in this country. And I've lived here all my life. I got my vaccines like everybody else. So it's not that they're against the vaccine. It has nothing to do with it. They don't give a crap about vaccines. They'll get a vaccine tomorrow. But what's enraged them is being told you have to. And at this point, in comes the right wing, much more than the left.
Hi there.
The right wing comes in and says, this isn't really about vaccine, and it isn't really about COVID. This is part of a plot, here we go now, where the government is reorganizing society and taking from you even more than it has already taken. And either you're a man or you're a mouse. Either you're going to resist or and here are all the heroes that are resisting. Here's a senator, here's a governor, here's a famous musician, here's an actress, here's a basketball player, people you respect that are saying, no, but this is all about rage at a system that's falling apart, being brilliantly displaced by, in this case, the Republican Party, to serve its desire to be the agent that will get rid of the bad people that are doing it. And listen, it's the exact reverse of what Biden did. Biden was elected by getting to Americans the idea that Mr. Trump was a lunatic who didn't understand the seriousness of a disease and failed to protect us because he's somewhere between stupid and an ideological moron. And that was it. And people voted against Mr. Trump. Nobody voted for Mr. Biden. There's nothing there. Mr. Biden is what the French would call nul. There's nothing there. So people didn't vote for Mr. Biden. They voted against Mr. Trump. By the way, millions voted for Mr. Trump because he was successfully able to continue what got him into office the first time. The story that he really is different. He behaves differently. He's the only really different person you can vote for. And by the way, that's correct. He was. He was clearly different from the Bidens and the Bushes and the Clintons and all of the other, what we call, the establishment in the United States. Every time the establishments attacked him for being crazy, loony, he got more votes. Because the identification of half the American people, at least, is that this government, this business class, and by the way, they lump them together, they are not our friends. That's why you hear, ironically, right-wing people denouncing the drug companies. Now, normally, right-wing people do not denounce big business. They avoid that. The left does that, although it doesn't do it the way it could and should. But the right wing almost never does. But they do that because they have to, because the rage that they're cultivating is partly, why are we trusting these people? And again, note the irony. These are the same people who, when they get a headache tomorrow, will go to the drugstore and buy the product of the exact same company whose name they see without a question. Without a question. So it's not about the illness, and it's not about the medicine, and it's not about vaccination. This is about the behavior of people when you have pushed them too far. I give a metaphor here in this country to help my audiences understand. The disaster that is called the United Kingdom, an economic disaster worse than what we have in the United States, which is saying a lot. The right wing, the conservatives, were able to turn the rage of the British working class. If you look at the statistics, the decline in the real wage of British workers after 2008 was among the worst in the world, worse than in the United States. So you really savaged the British working class, but you were able to take their anger and their rage and say that the problems of Britain are because of the Europeans. And the British working class voted for Brexit. That's the same crazy misunderstanding that led them to vote for Mr. Trump in this country. I really don't have much doubt that that won't last very much longer. Maybe long enough to bring complete fascism here, possible. But they are losing their hold because nothing is changing. Inequality in America is worse today than it was 2 years ago, worse than it was 4, 6, 8, 10 years ago. The jobs are leaving, the conditions are deteriorating, the health is falling apart. We have no idea how to handle the health costs coming from COVID. You know, we've had now, I don't know, 8, 9 million people affected by this. We have an enormous health bill coming, and we don't have national health insurance the way you do. So at the end of this month, the 31st of October, the last remaining bans on evicting people who cannot pay their rent is lifted. Nobody, I mean this, I'm talking to you from a country where nobody knows whether we're going to see 5 to 10 million people living on the streets of this country between now and Christmas. But we've never been in these situations before. This is a level of disintegration that is, in my judgment, the dominant political reality. You have to look at that to understand the specifics of your question, why people would do this and not that, which is difficult to understand until you said it in the framework that I'm trying to get across.
Great moment for a next question by BG and L.A. You referred in one of your explanation about shock in American society with the great crisis, capitalist crisis of 30s. And in fact, you mentioned that the cultural frame was missing. Vid, please mute yourself. Please mute yourself because there is a sound from your microphone, and I will translate now the question, or if you want to put it. We don't hear you. We don't hear you. Something is wrong with your mic. Nothing is wrong with your mic. I will translate now. Please mute yourself. There is a very bad sound coming. Okay, the question from Vid is in the chat. It goes, because you mentioned the lack of cultural frame in 30s. Right. People couldn't understand what is going on, and something similar you refer to now. His question was, who would be the loudspeaker to say the leading voice of communism in pop culture, in popular culture, since as Vid sees it, the debate between Peterson and Zizek unfortunately launched Peterson in intellectual as an intellectual let's say foundation of young educated Americans.
You mean Jordan Peterson?
Yeah, yeah. The one that didn't dare to face you in a debate.
I don't want this to sound personal, but I don't think he is a voice of young people in a broad general sense. He speaks to a certain part of our population, mostly young men who have a name in our culture called incel. I don't know if that word is familiar to you, incel.
Involuntary.
Celibate. Good.
Yeah.
Involuntary celibate. So it's, I mean, to be crude about it, it's young men who are not able, for whatever reasons, to form sexual relationships with partners in a way that they would wish, and they are angry and they are bitter about that. And they have developed, not all of them, of course, but a significant number of them have developed an analysis of modern society that explains their situation in a way that they find attractive. And that's where Jordan Peterson arrives. He has spoken to that community. He's Canadian, he's a psychologist, and he talks about the problems of a society that produced this community, and I think it's fair to say, make it appear that they are the victims, that they are not responsible particularly for their own situation, for that which tortures them, for that which afflicts them. And now my analysis of this. In my analysis of this is that this is another community that is doing what many other communities are doing. It is identifying itself in a certain way, claiming that it is the victim of social processes that are hurting them, which, by the way, I agree, they are the victims, but they then move to an identification of what it is that's victimizing them that I find very American. And by that I mean it's an analysis that carefully avoids dealing with capitalism as a system that is having a basic crisis now, that is suffering all kinds of dead ends, particularly in the United States, and there is no analytic of them. When I was invited to debate with Jordan Peterson, it was precisely because the young people here who were studying his work in a positive way wanted to hear a critique, an alternative about capitalism, since he didn't talk about it and avoided the topic at best, or dismissed all of Marxism as having nothing to offer young people like those who he was addressing. And they challenged me, and I said, sure, I'll debate. I mean, I'll debate him, and I will defend Marxism. That's what I've taught all my life. I've written a dozen books about it. You know, it's a material I love and that I study and that I teach. And he didn't do it, but it was, the whole point was to do the kind of analysis I've tried to present to you right now over the last hour and a half, namely a critique of a system that's in difficulty, situating the particular difficulties of young men who have this particular problem on their mind within the framework of a system that doesn't work. You might want to call it the sociological analysis of incels, to be put alongside the psychological analysis of incels that Jordan Peterson. I don't do the psychology. That's not my competency. But he doesn't do the sociology, and certainly not the Marxist approach, because clearly, because I've read his work and I was ready to debate him, he has never interested himself in Marxism. He doesn't know much about it. His dismissal, by the way, is again reminding us all that Stalin killed people and Mao did too.
Thank you. I mean, the maybe good also question would be, who is the Woody Guthrie? Is there a Woody Guthrie of today, or is there a John Steinbeck that you often refer to his grapes of wrath in your analysis? I mean, is there a communist cause present in popular culture? There is one YouTuber under name ContraPoints that had a best, according to Vid and according to me, the best critique of Peterson, but it is a really great piece of also high culture, not only popular culture, I think. So do you recognize in your, let's say, context and setting something in popular culture that follows the ongoings that you refer to related to democratic socialism, that this discontent of working class is successfully translated into cultural production that can further inspire emancipatory thought, massive emancipatory thought in popular.
Yes, but it's going on all the time. It isn't something that's happening only now. We have films and books and poetry and rock music and you name it, in which these themes that I'm talking about are already present. Lots of them. I mean, really, lots of them. We have, I'm trying to think, the last one I saw that you might find of some interest. Yes, there's a television series. Again, I don't know if this is available to you. It takes the name of a British house, Downton Abbey. It's a television program of many, sequence, and you can now see it all at once if you want on the HBO or whatever one of those platforms is. And there you have an aristocratic British family in the 1920s after World War I, and how it struggles with the difference between the aristocrats at the top and the servants who literally live below them in this house. And you can crystal clearly see that the writer and the television producers are struggling with how to articulate the different perspectives of these people on the house they all live in and where they all interact. And it's very clear why we are seeing now something that is literally about a situation 100 years ago in Britain. And the answer is, it's all about the end of one class structure, the old British landed aristocracy, and the emergence of the new world of the 1920s, the new capitalist world in which all of the old English, British empire life was disintegrating. And each person is trying to navigate that. Now, I would say to you, we are shown that, by the way, wildly popular in the United States. Many, many millions of people have watched this program. Many. We are being given something to look at that is very, very successful. Why? I don't want to be crude here, but Americans are learning from this discussion how to think about the society disintegrating around them. That's, in my judgment, I don't know this, but I think the artist knew that. Whether or not the artist who did this knew it, I'm telling you as a critic, that's what it's doing. It is a lesson to the American people in an entirely fictional cultural artifact how to think about what's happening here without moral judgments, remarkably open, balanced, showing the good and the bad, if you like, woven together. This is a person who, if they didn't read Hegel, learned it anyway. Everything is contradictory. The society and the family and the individual, all. It's a fantastic lesson that I would consider, I would put right in the beginning. And there's a long list of them that I could show you. And the same is true of music. We are now seeing musical styles, both popular and more developed, that are full of asking questions that we never saw before. I read a paper 3 days ago, published by the Federal Reserve Bank, one of its economists, fairly well known. I've seen his name before. So this was an article analyzing the inflation that we have in the United States, which is very socially disruptive on top of everything else. Okay. Let me finish. This is a scholarly paper. Then there's a footnote on the first page. It's the footnote number 2. This is a scholarly paper done by a modern economist, which means it's full of equations and arithmetic, the way we do in economics in order to make people believe we're very scientific. It's all bullshit, but okay, that's what we do. But his number 2 footnote, astonishing. I'm reading, I can't believe it. The number 2 footnote says, I'm going to do an analysis of economics of the inflation, but I'm going to set aside the possibility that modern economics really isn't about explaining things like inflation. It's actually there as an apology for a vicious, inappropriate, exploitative economic system. Punkt. That's it. I couldn't believe it. You know what that is? That is what the French call sabotage. That is using your little moment everywhere in the culture to begin to develop the chorus that will be a very complicated, very dense, and very rich socialist tradition in the United States, which is now forming and which I don't think can be stopped short of a fascistic destroying people, which we could have. But at this point, no. At this point, we are in a position I never imagined I would see in my lifetime.
I always say, I have to admit, I always say that there is a touch of catastrophic moment in your addresses that I also see as a sermons, but like sermons from those times when, as Alan Woods would put it, religion was the most popular expression of class struggle.
Right.
You know? So yeah. Anyway, I think we are not. I'm going to skip Joker now because I think that popular culture even produced antidote for what you are describing for these small subversions, and somehow subverted. This is my opinion. Subverted with Joker this rational way out of a crisis with some sort of outrage, irrational outrage of oppressed and discriminated personality. Anyway, we skip that. Katja Praznik, and I think that it would be enough. That would be the last question as far as I'm concerned, unless you have something else to add after her question. Katja, please introduce yourself. The floor is yours.
I'm sorry. I just had one little comment, actually, coming back because I really appreciate it. I'm sorry, I didn't introduce myself. So I'm Katja Praznik. I come from Slovenia, but I actually live in Buffalo, New York. But right now I'm in Slovenia, and I work at a university, and so it doesn't matter. I really appreciated everything that you have said about how bad it is in the US, because I can attest to that. The depth of ignorance of socialism and understanding a different reality. But I would also say, and be a little critical, because I think that there is also a very positive tradition which you have not mentioned, and that is connected to Black Panthers and Fred Hampton in particular. He talked very explicitly about socialism and he got killed for it. So I think that there's a huge omission, would be a huge omission to not bring that up, because there was also another group, Young Lords, who did extremely important work in US, but as we all know what happened to Black Panthers and to Fred Hampton, he was killed at 21. The guy was killed at age 21 immediately because he was too big of a threat to the system and because he garnered such huge support, and Black Panthers did. And so I think that that is an important strand of socialist tradition in the US that we should not forget about. And I think it plays an important role. And to this, I would also say that I think that it is easy to be very pessimistic today, but I think that we really need to, for instance, I learned a lot when I read a book also by an American Marxist, a Black scholar, now the name escapes me, who wrote about the Black Marxist tradition. I can't remember the name. And he wants to establish a tradition of rebellion that is very important for the Black community all over globally, and also within the US, that we don't talk about. And I think that it's important to talk about these things because everything is not as Black. I know that they were always defeated one way or the other by the American government and so on. But I think that if we want to really build on this possibility of change that today's changing world is promising, that we need to remember that there was always a potential and there always was rebellion, because otherwise we wouldn't even have any idea of socialism. So that would be just my little 5 cents to the discussion, which I really appreciate. So yeah, the name is Cedric Robinson, of course.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but my mind is on vacation a little bit. Sorry.
Again, I enjoy being able to say, I agree, absolutely. I think it's also a good criticism. I should have woven that into the story. You are absolutely right. In the Black community, in the Hispanic community, out of which the Young Lords came, in the white community, there have always been profoundly Marxist, either inspired by the Marxian tradition, knowingly reading it and studying it, or having absorbed it through their own reflection as human beings, even without formal study. They have always been there. They have always been important. I mean, I'll give you a couple of examples, make it very personal. When I was a young person, my first political act was to support the Republican Party in the community where I lived. My parents were very upset. They didn't like me to do that. And probably half the reason I did it was because it made my parents upset and I wanted to do that. So I've come a long way. Well, at a certain point in my life, I encountered an American Marxist economist by the name of Paul Sweezy. Some of you may know his work. All right, he and a colleague of his named Harry Magdoff, Sweezy and Magdoff, produced a journal in this country. It is still existing. It's called the Monthly Review. It is an independent Marxist socialist journal. And Paul Sweezy and Harry Magdoff had organized, I heard about it, once every couple of weeks, a group of high school students that were interested would come and they would teach us Marxism quietly in their apartment in the middle of the Cold War here in New York. That was absolutely crucial for me. If I'm doing Marxism now, which I hope I am, that's what I want to do, then I am dependent in what I do on the very tradition that Katja just spoke about. I am part of that. And you're absolutely right. Fred Hampton, the Panthers in their way, the Young Lords. Look, one of the results of the Panthers was an organization, you might be interested if you don't know about it, called the Black Agenda Report. It has a website, Black Agenda Report. There you will get probably the most advanced Marxist criticism of what's going on in the United States from the standpoint of an active, rebellious African-American community. And they're not the only ones, but I think their work is extraordinarily good. You will learn a great deal from the collection of people who work around the Black Agenda Report. And I have also to tell you that when I talk to you about the emergence of a socialist tradition, there are more podcasters, more interviews than we've ever had on the left in the United States. Extraordinary. I do 3 to 4 television and radio interviews every day, 7 days a week. You're the 3rd one today, and I have 2 more before I go to sleep. And they range everything from the BBC down to a local podcast of a union in Rhode Island. I never expected to see this in my lifetime. I've been a teacher in the university. I've always had classes, but now, just to give you one idea, I have a YouTube channel for the Economic Update television program and radio program I do every week. We have 250,000 subscribers. I mean, who ever heard of this before? Every show I do is anti-capitalist, and I say so. Every program is a critique of capitalism as a system. And we get thousands more subscribers every week. I don't know all that's going on in this country, but I have never seen anything like it. I became active as a young person in the 1960s. My first political activity was struggle against the Vietnam War. But we had nothing like this in the 1960s. This is an advance of the left in America that is greater than anything, again, I have ever seen. And I want you to know that because it's going to continue and it's already shaking the scenery of every corner of American political and economic life.
Thank you, Professor. It was a pleasure for me as initiator of this program and project. I think that everybody enjoyed at least as I did, since I really think that it's very nice when you say, okay, we have professor from Yale and Harvard and Stanford, was that, and he's Marxist, you know, and he's like anti-capitalist, but also there is this, so to say, different frequency that also comes to the fore once you mentioned democracy at work and the experience of self-management that we also just shortly commented on. Maybe that would be some future debate or seminar. And I just have to thank you. And if no one else has some small, very small question or comment, we would have to thank Professor to leave him into his mission of bringing back socialist language, in fact, wording, in fact, to public life of America or media life of American society, and to hope that we will somehow manage to find this same frequency, because how to, as I said, even Vatican Commission for Economy recognized Marx's analysis of capital as perfect, and we in Eastern Europe now have to forget it, like we have to forget everything that we learned in secondary school, it's really intellectual disaster and humiliation, but we will recover, I think.
Well, I enjoy very much knowing that you are doing the kind of work that you are all doing, that you have these interests. Your questions have been wonderful. The level of agreement between you and me, I find very interesting. I'm going to think about it quite a bit. But I'd be glad to do this again because these kinds of interactions are useful for me. I learn. Your way of thinking is something I can bring into the work I do here in the United States. I want to say only one personal thing. This kind of work that I can now do in the United States is on a personal level, as a Marxist, unspeakably satisfying. I am having the time of my life, and I could not be happier about all of the opportunities that exist. As a good Hegelian, I studied Hegel a long time, out of the disintegration of US capitalism, opportunities for new systems are emerging that are spectacular to be part of that process. So for me, on a personal level, I don't have to go back to Europe, as I love doing, to touch the socialism that was there before. I now have the feeling when I go to Europe that I'm bringing something also to you, that something is happening here that can help revive socialism there as well. But I do have another interview, so I do need to say goodbye.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right.
At least there is some sort of American dream still being there. Great.
Yes, just a little different from what they used to
yeah. For Mayflowers, but still with a great mission.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye, all the best. Eto, nadam se da ste imali priliku da čujete nešto što možda niste čuli u izlaganjima. Šta da vam kažem? Evo, izvolite, možemo mi malo da prodiskutujemo ako hoćete. Neko pitanje, ako imali komentar. Mi ćemo imati dve gošće još, američke umetnica i aktivistkinja, novinarka, u stvari aktivistkinja u medijima, iz Los Angelesa, i to će biti finale projekta kao Nezavereni u Beogradu i Los Angelesu. Šta da vam kažem, ja mislim sa Wolffom može mnogo da se radi, jer on, ako gledate njegova, ja sam imao prilike stvarno veliki broj da odgledam njegovih tih izlaganja. Postoji jedan moment kada on izlazi iz zone analize u zonu predloga i to se zove democracy at work, demokratizacija radnog mesta, koja, evo malo pogledajte i sami, to je ja čak mislim da to deluje apstraktno i njemu, mislim, kako bi sad demokratija na poslu, mislim samoupravljanje neka vrsta da kažem, mislim koje su to pitanja onda da agendi, znači to je teorijski naravno tačno, ali me užasno zanima kako bi on sad u ovoj situaciji, toj depriviranoj, višoj, da kažem, srednjoj klasi u stvari, jer ta bolje stojeća radnička klasa u Americi je u stvari srednja klasa, tako se i doživljava. Kod nas je to malo, mislim, u Evropi je malo drugačije. Kako njoj ponuditi demokratiju na radnom mestu, meni onako prilično sa svim tim kultom preduzetništva, privatne svojine, individualizma i tako dalje. Ne znam, mislim da bi on se raspitivao za samoupravljanje i kao baš bi imali šta da naučimo od vas, a ja ko za baksus poslednje što sam, ne znam, čitao Koricine intervjue, pa sad i Musić je izdao novu knjigu, pa ne znam, kod Močnika na kursu, ono sad su sitna crevca ide, mislim, kako kažem sad, ne smemo nikom da kažemo, ali to je isto jedna mitologija da je ovde samoupravljanje bilo ozbiljan. On je bio ozbiljan ideološki projekat, ali politički, ekonomski je bio poluozbiljan, što je nekad opasnije nego ne biti ozbiljan uopšte. I onda tako kako on s entuzijazmom, da, Jugoslavija sam upravljen, svi mi pitaju za Jugoslaviju, i ono kao, znate šta, ja se ne bavim time, ima evo novija produkcija, mogu da vam pošaljem linkove, ali može da pričamo odvojeno o tome i tako, eto. To su vam sad neki dodatni još komentari. Pa ne znam šta da kažem, da li ćemo moći da dobijemo od vas neki feedback, neku evaluaciju ovog događaja. Bili bi stvarno zahvalni, jer ne znam, mislim da smo nekako igrom više onako srećnih okolnosti dobili priliku da ovako angažujemo profesora nego što smo sve to unapred osmislili, pa bi značilo da pošaljete neke svoje komentare, mislim od 5-6 redova, šta ste čuli, da li ste čuli i tako dalje, i to će značiti ovim umetnicama koje dolaze, koji će da prave neku vrstu, kako se razume, institut za teorije zavere. Sad kao institut. Inače, čuo sam u Novom Sadu, ako je Đorđe još tu, da će katedra da se osnuje, jedan umetnik sa akademije tamošnje, bavi se godinu, tipa kaže, on će da osnuje katedru, vjerojatno kao umetnički projekt, katedra za teorije zavere. Dobro.
To sam, nisam čuo.
Da.
Ja imam još jedan komentar, ako može. Ja ću vam poslati jedan interesantan sam članak čitala na temu teorija zavjere, koje su isto bazirane u jednom časopisu, Boston Review je objavio jedan čovjek koji mislim da je Francuz, ali radi tamo, i mi se činilo vrlo interesantno jer mislim on je pričao o teorijama zavjere kao u nekim ideološkim zavjerama, ali taj članak je isto interesantan jer se veže na koronu i na sva ta pitanja i kaže da u stvari je problem kad se daje tolika bitnost da teorije zavjere su u stvari problem zbog toga što kaže na neku ekonomsku frustraciju koja je u društvu i zato je tako lako onda te stvari, kako se kaže, da se ljudi uhvate na te priče, ali mi se činilo vrlo interesantno razmišljanje jer se taj čovjek nadovezao i na nekog antropologa, mislim da katalonskog ili španskog, gdje pokušava to objasniti, da se ljudi puno puta diskvalificira što vjeruju u neke teorije zavjere, ali se u stvari ne gleda generalni društveno-ekonomski kontekst i njihove i te frustracije kojima je, mislim, i Wolff pričao, kako je rekao, kako se hvate na sve te priče od Trumpa i drugih demagoga i populista u Ameriki. To samo, pa ću vam poslati ću u chat staviti još taj članak, možda će vam biti interesantan.
Mi smo inače preko akademije i preko početne saradnje sa Bratićem, evo šaljem taj stekli dosta solidan uvid. Ja recimo desetak naučnih radova koji na akademiji se najviše kotiraju po citiranju, sad da li je to relevantno, ali Bratić je recimo vrlo nas jasno upozorio. To su nekad marginalne priče, potpuno nebitni narativ, koje onda mainstream mediji uzmu kao oruđe, kojim onda udaraju po svakom neslaganju, svakom protivljenju i tako dalje i tako dalje. Tako da, mislim, vrlo je zanimljiv fenomen i mislim da vidjet ćete, za 10 dana ćemo izaći sa tim preprič projektom, gde su ti mlađi ljudi čitali te radove i prepričali na način da pročitate stranu i po i znate šta pišu. Inače, vrlo gust naučni tekst. I svi se slažu, nema jasne definicije, ceo politički spektar, ceo socijalni spektar i u nekim oblicima konspiracija, to je što je Jodi Dean rekla, svi smo u nekoj zaveri, samo pitanje u kojoj. Tako da na kraju, mislim, danas je na counter punchu juče bio članak o Colin Powellu, gde su on i bušisti, takozvani, nazvani konspiracionistima pre intervenciju u Iraku. Mislim, vrlo otvoreno. I to jeste bila zavera. To je bila zavera da se lažno prikažu podaci o kobajagi postojanju, mislim, šta su ove glupe priče prema tome, tako nečemu i tako dalje.
Ali to nije bila zavjera, to je bila istina, tamo je problem.
Misliš, dobro kažem, tamo su ih nazvali konspiracionisti.
Da, ali to nije bila konspiracija, to su fakti su bili, da su se slagali.
I kad kažeš konspiracija, ti a priori misliš da je to neka laž, ali ne mora da znači.
Da, to je istina, jer teorija, conspiracy theory, it's a theory, you just need to prove that it's right or wrong.
Apsolutno.
That's true.
To je, već sam izraz je zamka. Već smo ušli u diskurs o teorijama zavere kao nekom najvećem društvenom zlu i tako dalje. Mislim, naravno ne možemo da izađemo jer postoje, kao što je bila teorija o jevrejskoj zaveri i šta ja znam i tako dalje, postoje teorije koje su stvarno neviđeno toksične, takve, mislim, teorije. I sad još da li je to teorija? Uglavnom, naučna produkcija, da li su to teorije, da li te zavere mogu da se provere, da li postoje ili ne postoje, da li je nenamerno sinhrono delovanje zavera ili da li ti ljudi koji veruju u te priče uopšte vode računa o tome. Jer rađeno je u Nemačkoj istraživanje sada anti-lockdown protesta i izbacili su taj termin dijagonalizam. I to je isto u istraživanjima o teorijama zavere, ovi statističari su radili što je da poludiš dok pročitaš tekst, bar ja poludim. I na kraju nema zaključka. Sve društvene grupe imaju po neku zaveru u koju veruju, sve društvene grupe imaju nepoverenje određeno prema zvaničnim narativima. Mislim, na kraju onako ostanemo praznih šaka. I naravno ostane nam taj refleks, ta želja da suprotstavimo iracionalnosti. Tu stvari više ima jedan moment tabuizacije, bukvalno nego racionalnog. Niko neće ni da se bavi time, a Bratić kaže ne treba se time ni baviti. Ne treba obraćati pažnju na glupe, nebitne priče, mislim, koje nemaju veze ni sa čim. I zašto smo mi toliko time fascinirani? Vrlo zanimljivo. Mislim, vidjet ćete u prepriču, kad izađu tih 10 prepriča naučnih radova, mislim, to će vam trebati pola sata da pročitate, a zaista je jedno 150 strana gustog naučnog teksta, mislim, koji onako prilično depresivan, moram da kažem, jer to je pipanje u mraku, da kažem. Ne znate odakle priđete toj temi.
Šta je dijagonalizam?
Dijagonalizam je pojava da u protestima, evo sad imate novi članak na biltenu o ovim protestima u Sloveniji. Ja nisam oduševljen sa člankom, isto je upao u zamku, koristi teoretičari zavere kao diskvalifikacioni termin. I mislim da to nije lumpen proletarijat, da je pravi termin lumpen malograđanijat, da treba da budemo tu vrlo distinktivni.
Lumpen buržuazija je rekao ovaj čovjek Zaher. Lumpen buržuazija.
Apsolutno, ne lumpen proletarijat, to je druga stvar. Mislim, razumijem šta je hteo da kaže, on je objašnjeno tamo. Ali šta je hteo reći, šta je bilo pitanje malo pre, izvinjavam se, malo sam sad popustio, šta Marija si upitala?
Dijagonalizam, što to znači?
Znači u tim, kao i u ovom članku što možete da pročitate na biltenu, te grupe su sastavljene, recimo u Sloveniji imate ljude koji su bili sa levicom na protestu, a sad su i ovde. Tako je u tim protestima u Nemačkoj imate od glasača Die Linkija do Alternative für Deutschland, ili kako se kaže. Znači, imate potpuno jednu ideološku nekoherentnost. Dijagonalizam od levice ili krajnje levice, kako se to kaže, ajde u parlamentarizmu, do krajnje desnice. Znači, da, evo ga članak. To ima i Mate Kapović, ja mislim da je pisao na biltenu jedan kratak prikaz tog istraživanja. Znači, ideološki spektar je propao, ukratko da kažemo. U javnoj akciji, u masovnoj akciji on je propao, nema ga više. Ali tako je bilo i u revolucijama istorijskim. Nigde nije bilo koherentne masovne akcije. Tu su uvek bili, kako da kažem, vrlo pomešani motivi i naravno, ako je u pitanju masovni pokret, mora da bude deo stanovništva koji je najviše ugrožen i sad imamo tu bizarnu stvar da su najviše ugroženi najveći fanovi individualizma, preduzetništva, sitnog obrta, samostalnosti, nezavisnosti, čak kaže ovaj članak, kaže to su i profesori koji mogu da drže predavanja kako oni hoće u srednjoj školi i tako dalje. Svi koji su u stvari obožavaoci na neki način neki jedno od ključnih postulata neoliberalne ideologije, oni su sad najugroženiji lockdown. Njihov svet se ruši, zato oni dominiraju i zato su njihovi protesti tako u stvari konfuzni. Oni ne zna se ni šta hoće, da budu protiv lockdowna. Mislim, šta je to? Dobro, razumemo, to je zahtev, ali on je potpuno iracionalan. Mislim, realno iracionalan, ali nije iracionalan ako njih nesrazmerno košta egzistencijalno. Nije iracionalan, nego je ne mogu da artikulišu antisistemski, nego kažu što ovo radi, kaže Wolff, idu protiv vlade, samo protiv vlade u Sloveniji, sad je super, verovatno što idu, ali opet čovjek gleda, kao i ovde koji su bili, oni u junu, koji su ono protesti, čovječe, došli ovi entristi iz N21 za malo da ih prebiju tamo, mislim, kakvi fašisti dolaze, ali to su okolnosti u kojima živimo, mislim, morat ćemo da se borimo i u takvim. Eto, to je dijagonalizam, znači ta konfuzija ideološka, gde vi svaki put imate na sceni samo jednu potpuno neartikulisanu grupaciju koja ima jedan određen uski cilj, tada protiv je anti-lockdown, protiv je zatvaranja i tako, ali iz različitih razloga, a inače najveći pristalica ključnih sistemskih ideoloških postulata.
Nebojša, mogu da se uključim?
Izvolite, Aco, da.
Pa, hvala ti prvo na ovoj prilici da se uključim i da odslušam, iako sam profesora slušao i ranije, ali večeras mi se jako dopao. Mene teorija zavere posebno ne interesuje, ali me je čitava ova priča o teoriji zavere i diskusija, on je iskoristio da nam što šta kaže, što je direktno, kako da kažem, povezano sa temama koje nas ili mene više interesuju, političke teme, priča o socijalizmu, pa usput i o radu, odnosno demokratiji na radnom mestu. I tu se sad ti i ja ne slažemo, ali to bi bilo, moglo bi da bude svrsishodno neslaganje, odnosno konstruktivno, da tu temu vratimo i da, kako da kažem, da nešto osmislimo što bi bilo, kako da moglo da rezultira, recimo, da se o socijalizmu priča u svim našim ex-jugoslovenskim republikama, jer kao što on priča u Americi, da počnemo naglas da govorimo o socijalizmu. Ti se sećaš, pre mnogo godina smo mi napravili jednu partiju, vratimo socijalizam, odnosno zvali smo to...
Da, to je super ime. Borba za socijalizam.
Borba za socijalizam. Da, i od tog nismo odmakli dalje. Evo, ovaj čovjek me sad jako motivisao da se ozbiljno poduhvatimo tog posla i da vidimo šta je to zapravo bilo. Samo sam to da prokomentarišem. Hvala ti.
Jasno, hvala. Pa mislim, ja sam rekao da se ja nađem u nebranom grožđu, mislim, naravno da ću da svuda branim i taj pokušaj i njegovu iskrenost, kako ja vidim da se, ali ono što je baš pre neki dan Močnik rekao na predavanju, kako samoupravljanje ako ste vi na globalnom tržištu i nemate tehnologiju? To je gotovo, to nema samoupravljanja. Vama upravlja imperativ prodaje proizvoda na globalnom tržištu, gde se vi takmičite sa zemljama koje su tehnološki naprednije ili gde radnička klasa nema ni približno toliko prava kao ovde, kao što su recimo azijski tigrovi i tako dalje. Znači vi nemate
sa tim da krenemo, ali da ne otvaramo.
Dobro, okej, da. Ne, mislim, to je moj, ja sam to još ne znam, mislim, Gal je imao jedno predavanje, pa sam, bukvalno mi on rekao, ono što sam vidio u fabrikama. Izvidite, ako imate proizvodni proces koji nastao u kapitalizmu, sa celom hijerarhijom društvenom, koji je stvari replika cele društvene hijerarhije, gde jedan sedi na vrhu, a 100 rade dole u blatu, i vi ga uzmete i stavite ga u socijalizam, taj proizvodni proces je ključan za definisanje prirode tog društva. A to kako ćete ga vi nazvati ili da li ćete u jednom trenutku, ko što se i dešavali u kapitalizmu, da date više prava radnicima, ono suštinski neće promeniti ono što Marks traži od slobodnog društva neće promeniti položaj čoveka kao stvaralačkog bića. Sedimo ceo dan u kluzu za peglom i peglamo još za nemačko tržište i mislim, ili sedimo u BVK za mašinom i mislim, to neće promeniti. Čak i sa 3 put većom platom. Neće promeniti. To nije posao za ljudsku individu više. A naravno da su morali tako radi. Ja ne mislim da su oni ni imali drugi izbor. To je sad naša dijalektika. Šta je drugo moglo? Verovatno ništa drugo. To je naš problem. Što su oni morali, da bi došli do sredstava za bilo kakvu modernizaciju, za iskorak, morali su da uđu u te kompromise. Sad, ko je bio pametan? Lako je sad pričati da nije trebalo. Svi su srednje klase oduševljeni bili. Ja, vidiš, imamo lepe stanove.
Hajde da mi na osnovu naknadne pameti projektujemo u budućnosti.
Pa znate šta, biće moguće, zato mislim da je s Wolffom veliki potencijal saradnje, jer on, kao što vidite, ima energiju, ima njegov, ako ga duže gledate, on nama deluje malo kao onaj propovednik američki, baš je kod su propovedi, ali u američkom kulturi to je ključna stvar. Evo pogledajte Plodovi gneva Steinbeckovog, kada propovednik lokalni u protestantskoj tradiciji koji je uvek izabran od zajednice, kada se osjeća nesiguran. Znači mi treba da izradimo koncept s kojim ćemo se osjećati sigurni, a i on isto treba da izradi. Znači šta ćemo mi ponuditi globalnoj srednjoj klasi? Da digne ruke od svojih privilegija i da prepusti radne procese politikama emancipacije, da ćemo svi biti za 2-3 generacije praktično rodna bića po Marksu. To srednja klasa neće dozvoliti. To ja kažem iz socijalne pozicije. Gde meni neko da oduzme moju magistarsku titulu i privilegije, ne pa da mi napamet. Mislim, to je naš problem. Zato po meni mi treba da se bavimo srednjom klasom, ali nećemo sad o tome. I kada u teorijama zavere, kada uđete iza ove, da kažem, iza te transparentne, da kažem, fasade, recimo sjajni su komentari bili u ovoj anketi QAnon. Znači šta je ona realna strana QAnon? Pa to da mladi Amerikanci iz srednje klase ne mogu više da prežive u sistemu. Od 60 ispitanika u nekom intervju, nekoj anketi sa Democratic Socialist of America, 58 su studenti koji ne mogu da vrate kredit. To je jedenje dece. I onda nam tamo jedna filozofkinja rekla, pa to vam je Kron koji jede svoju decu. Mislim, pazite šta izađe za jedno takve sulude priče kao što je QAnon i tako dalje. A to je srednjeklasni strah. To je strah srednje klase. Što on kaže, ova slabije plaćena radna snaga, ona nije u panici. Daju otkaze svuda. Zato što mogu da nađu bolje plaćen posao. Mislim, nije to baš tako, ali evo, on je rekao to. Tako da mi, srednja klasa, mi smo problem sveta. Mislim, mi treba da to priznamo sebi i da kažemo naše pozicije i privilegije su opterećenje za globalnu proizvodnju, treba ona drugčije se organizuje, a s druge strane mi jedini znamo kako bi to moglo, mislim. Ipak smo mi na toj poziciji, mi, znanja i produkcije modela i eksperimenta i nauku držimo u svojim rukama i posle čudimo što nam ne veruje. Vidjet ćete već u anketi, sjajni odgovori su bili uopšte kapacitetima ovoga što mi zovemo naukom, a što bi trebalo da zovemo kao što lepo zovu i Marks i ne znam i danas ozbiljni teoretičari buržoaskom naukom, mislim, koja praktično radi u cilju status quo, održanja status quo. Tako da, eto, imamo 1000 tema, izvinite, ja sam se sad raspričao, baš sam bio, znam da je profesor Par, odložili smo 2 puta seminar, pa sam se malo i plašio šta će i kako će biti. Pa sam zato sad ovako euforičan. Hvala vam svima, ako nema nekog pitanja ili dodatnog komentara, budite ako možete aktivni na neki način u tom projektu ovih umetnica. I to je to. Moji seminari su ozloglašeni, mislim, koji ja koordiniram, traju po 6 sati, evo sad traja samo 2 i nešto, 2,5 sata, nije tako strašno.
Hvala, laku noć.
Hvala, Aco, pozdrav.
Pozdrav.
Oluja, ništa nisi rekao.
A jebi ga, kad ne mogu da dođem do reći o TV-evi.
Pa dobro, što ne digneš ruku je. Jao, čoveče.
Treba to znati, a ja ne umem da je podignem.
Ajde reci tvoju omiljenu teoriju zavere iz tamo 68. Šta ste mislili, ko je zaveren protiv koga? Aj malo nas istorijski eduk.
Nismo mi imali teorije zavera.
Kako niste imali?
Imali smo samo kao zezalicu i zajebanciju, znaš, ono, da li je Tito ovaj ili onaj, da li je ovog porekla ili onog porekla, koga je ubacio, koga nije ubacio i tako dalje.
Aha, dobro.
Bilo onako sa margine, onako kad bismo imali, kad se opustimo i tako imamo vremena da se zajebavamo, onda smo tako izmišljali teorije zavere. Inače, u praktičnom operativnom smislu i ideološkom, naravno, i teorijskom nikada nismo imali taj problem.
Dobro, ali zar vaš slogan crvena buržoazija nije upravo, da kažem, taj repertoar? Jer oni nisu to bili svesno i namerno. Vi ste njih smestili u domen politički, ideološki, koji oni objektivno jesu već počeli da zauzimaju, ali to je upravo to. Vi ste se u stvari kao crveni buržuji zaverili protiv radničke klase i radnog naroda, kako da kažem. Ali oni nisu bili po sebi, oni nisu bili za sebe to. Znači, vi ste ih optužili da su se zaverili kao buržoaska klasa protiv socijalističkog projekta.
Ne, nismo ih optužili na taj način, jebih. Nego, ni crvena buržoazija, ni drugi socijalni slojevi na koje smo se referirali i protiv koji smo bili i tako dalje, nisu bili, kako da kažem, snaga po sebi. Oni su samo u kombinaciji sa dejstvu ili paralelnom dejstvu ili komplementarnom dejstvu posjećaju sopstvenom, da kažem, u znacima navoda, iskrenom mišljenju šta treba da se radi. Nismo mi njih crvenu buržoaziju, recimo, zamišljali tako kao nekoga ko se svesno usmerio protiv radnika i socijalizma i Jugoslavije, etc., nego naprosto da su oni u funkciji tog bitnog proizvodnog procesa i svog mesta i pozicije u produktivnim odnosima i da oni naprosto deluju po tom nekakvom svom unutrašnjem osjećaju, unutrašnjem nagonu, kako ih tera njihov interes iz te pozicije i tog mesta u produktivnom procesu i produktivnim odnosima.
Dobro, onda je trebalo da bude kao crvena buržoazija.
Pa sad ne možemo komplikovati.
Dobro.
Kao slogan ide, ne znam, možda se Kraus neće složiti, ali po običaju on je bio na drugoj strani.
Ma nije u tome stvar, nego je taj proizvodni odnosi su jednostavno izbacili ponovo u prvi plan te formacije koje su karakteristične za kapitalistički način proizvodnje, jer je on postao preovlađujući i ono što kaže Pantić, nije preovlađujući bio, nije bio većinski, ali je bio dominantan. On je bio odlučujući za društveni proizvod, za planiranje i sve i naravno je preslikao socijalnu strukturu koja je za njega karakteristična. Ali to nije, ja mislim da to nije namerno rađeno. Jedino što je stvarno veliki problem što to nije ozbiljno analizirano, mislim, posledice nisu postojale, te analize postojale su, ali nisu uspele.
Oluja, samo ti kažem, ima dana više nego kobasica.
Pa pričali smo o tome, kad govorimo konkretno o crvenoj buržoaziji, ali uopšte u srednjoj klasi, nema jedinstvenog entiteta. Niti su jedinstveni politički subjekt. unutar svakog sloja socijalnog, na sva 3 nivoa postoji makar 3 različite priče, 3 različite narativa, 3 određene prakse, 3 određena osjećaja. Različito se odnosi direktor male firme u nekom selu u pizdi materinoj, različito se osjeća za razliku od recimo direktora u Beogradu, neke dobre firme, a da ne kažem Energoinvestor i Energoprojekta. Malom direktoru je problem konkurencija i njemu treba neko ko će, a to je pre svega država, oni se oslanjaju na državu, ko će regulisati tu vrstu odnosa da konkurencija ne uništi, da ih ne uništi. I zato oni s druge strane stvaraju, najčešće ti mali direktorčići su stvarali saveze sa radničkom klasom. Dok velikom Emeriku Blumu nije trebalo niko. Znaš, on je imao sve u svojim rukama i znaš, on je diktirao taj kako će se država partija odnositi prema njemu, a ne oni kako će se on odnositi. A ovi na srednjem nivou, recimo, mislim sad govorimo grubo govoreći, na srednjem nivou direktori, znači, oni su bili u najgorem položaju, individualno, znači, pritisak od ozgo i od ozdo. Pa se ti sad snađi i tuci se i s jednima i sa drugima, a naravno imaš i svoje interese i svoje kamarila i tako dalje. Mislim, za sve su, kako da kažem, potrebne malo suptilnije i dubinskije analize, ne samo ovo na prvi pogled kako nam izgleda. Anglo.
Jasno, naravno. I mislim, i treba i time da se bavimo, jer evo, kao što se vidi, mislim, došlo je, Wolff je po meni došao do kraja. Ako nema demokratije na radnom mestu, neće biti ni u društvu. To jest u proizvodnji, u ekonomiji, neće biti ni u društvu. Sad, kako uvesti demokratiju u proizvodni proces koji je potpuno hijerarhijski? To je suštinsko pitanje, ja mislim. I taj proizvodni proces jeste rezultat zavere, pod znacima navoda. To jest namere vladajućih klasa od faraona, jer kako se gradila piramida, isto tako se gradi put danas. Isti raspored hijerarhijski, 1 na vrhu, 1000 na dnu piramide. Isti. Znači, to jeste ne zavera, nego to je naravno imanentni plan vladajućih klasa da uposle običan svet, radničku klasu ili seljake ili tako dalje u masi, jer su dostupni, a da oni sede na vrhu i da ne rade ništa i da uberu te plodove. Tako je svi proizvodni procesi, sem ovo malo ovih, da kažem, individualaca koji su se razvili od zanatlija i tako dalje. I sad, ne znam da li ste vi čuli, šta vi mislite, koliko ima proizvodnju u Americi, radnih mesta u proizvodnji, a koliko ima usluga? Da li može neko da pretpostavi?
Čitao sam ja pre nekoliko godina, razlika je drastična.
Danas je 9% samo u proizvodnji. 91% radnih mesta su to što se zove usluge, sad šta sve tu ima.
1:10.
I što je najgore, tu ima dobar deo tih koji stvarno zavise od sebe i svojih bilo kvaliteta, bilo, da kažem, pozitivnih ili, da kažem, negativnih kvaliteta. I to je jedno individualističko društvo, atomizovano, koje jednostavno više, i to se vidi u ovim protestima, tu više orijentacije nema. To je samo moj interes, moj stomak, i onda dolazi kult individualizma koji je posebno prisutan u tim centralnim kapitalističkim zemljama, a posebno u Americi i recimo ovim, da kažem, nasleđima protestantske reformacije koja je bila oslonjena na tu vrstu guranja ekonomske snalažljivosti u prvi plan i jeftine crkve, što je tad bila jeftina država, što je do dan danas ostao slogan. Kako te procese promeniti? To je ključno pitanje. Čemu demokratija i samoupravljanje ako si ti radnik, fizikalac na kopu, ne znam, rudarskom? Što sam ja, recimo, gledao u svojoj praksi. Koji je njegov interes? Njegov interes je da sakrije iza najnovije gomili da spava. Zašto bi on radio za ne znam, danas radi za 40.000 i lomio se tamo 8 sati. To je ludost. To je ponižavajuće. Znači, nema tako, to mora sve da se promeni jednostavno u nekoj budućnosti, da se radi manje, da se radi sa mašinama, a tu promenu srednja klasa je zaverena protiv te promene.
Teo sam, Nebojša, da odem, ali samo da ti nešto ilustrujem ovde večeras. Pre svega govorim iz Kelna, pa sam posebno inspirisan Marksovim korenima. Vidi, ovo što sad mi razgovaramo na ovoj tehnologiji danas, u doba samoupravljanja, apsolutno nezamislivo, ni ti, ni ja, ni bilo ko nije mogo da zamisli ovu vrstu tehnologije. Kad ti sada spominješ tehnološke procese, da pustimo malo da se stvore timovi koji će tu problematiku sa svih strana da prosvetle i da o tome razgovaramo. Ti si sad večeras motivisan i jako je ovo dobro bilo, ali ne možemo večeras da ništa drugo da zaključimo, nego da ćemo da se time bavimo i da ćemo uključivati ljude sa različitih struka. Ovaj IT proboj koji se sad dešava i u raznim drugim procesima, ovo što on spomenje, veštačku inteligenciju, mislim, svašta se događa na planeti. Tako da ne možemo baš da budemo, kako da kažem, toliki pesimisti, a za optimizam mora mnogo da se radi.
Potpuno se slažem, Aco, potpuno se slažem. I kad mene pitaju kako sad ti zamišljaš, mislim mene, ili kad pitaju bilo koga, naravno da treba da sednu ljudi i da rade vjerojatno 30 godina da bi uopšte došli do tih modela. Naravno, pa mislim, to je potpuno jasno. Uopšte ne mislim da imamo ni trenutno ni mogućnosti da to, ali treba da negde idejno shvatimo da dok svaki čovek na svetu ne bude kroz proizvodnju i reprodukciju se ostvarivao kao stvaralačko biće, neće biti ni mira, neće biti ni taloženosti, ni nikakvog rešenja, ni za zagađenje, ni ničega. Mislim u idealnom slučaju, ali hoću da kažem, treba znamo gde idemo, samo to. I u tome smislu borba za socijalizam je apsolutno najbolje ime za organizaciju koja se time bavi. Apsolutno.
Hvala.
Dobro, eto, tu smo, 4-5 nas, pa sad kad smo odužili, ako neko još hoće nešto kaže, ako ne, ja završavam za 10 sekundi. Hvala svima. Čujemo se, vidimo se, ove umetnice će biti tu od 10. novembra, dobit ćete informacije.
Laku noć još jednom.